Most people think wealth is a number. It isn't. That's the first mistake. The second mistake is even more expensive. People assume the rich and everyone else are playing the same game, just with different scores. As if the wealthy simply worked harder, saved more, invested earlier, and ended up farther ahead on the same road. That is not what happened. The rich did not just accumulate more money. They crossed specific thresholds that changed the rules around them. They entered different terrain, different risks, different options, different time horizons, different relationships with work, debt, taxes, stress, and even identity. And if you don't understand those thresholds, you can spend your entire life chasing income while never actually getting closer to wealth. Because the line between comfortable and rich is not drawn where most people think it is. It is drawn at 3 milestones. Not flashy milestones. Not social media milestones. Not the kind people brag about at dinner. Structural milestones. The kind that change what money does for you. The kind that quietly separate the person who is always managing life from the person who is increasingly designing it. And the first one is the most misunderstood of all, because almost everybody mistakes it for success. It isn't success. It's stability. And those are not the same thing. A person making $250,000 a year in a high-cost city can still be fragile. A couple earning 6 figures can still be one layoff, one medical event, one divorce, one bad business quarter away from seeing how thin the whole performance really was. Nice house, expensive car, private school tuition, annual vacation, maybe some index funds, maybe some home equity, maybe a respectable 401k. From the outside, it looks like they won. But if the machine stops, the life trembles. That is not wealth. That is a high-maintenance costume stitched together by active income. And millions of people spend decades trying to look rich while never reaching the first real milestone that matters. The point where your life no longer depends on immediate obedience. That's the first milestone. Not when you can buy nicer things. When you can say no. No to a humiliating boss. No to the job you secretly hate. No to the desperate deal. No to the client who pays late and drains your soul. No to panic. This is the first real dividing line, and it's more radical than it sounds. Because before that point, almost every financial decision you make is contaminated by necessity. You call it preference. You call it ambition. You call it being practical. But underneath, necessity is steering. You don't invest with patience. You invest with hope. You don't negotiate from strength. You negotiate from fear. You don't choose the best opportunity. You choose the one that keeps the lights on. That is not a moral failure. That is what dependence feels like. The first wealth milestone is reached when your basic life is no longer held hostage by the next paycheck. Notice what I did not say. I did not say financial freedom in the cartoon version. I did not say living on a beach. I did not say retire at 35. I did not say passive income covers every dream you've ever had. I said your life is no longer held hostage. That's different. It might mean 1 year of living expenses in liquid, boring, unsexy reserves. It might mean a household with a low burn rate and flexible expenses. It might mean enough invested capital that a job loss becomes a disruption instead of a personal emergency. It might mean the ability to step away from toxic work without instantly endangering your family. This milestone matters because it changes your posture. Until then, money is oxygen. After that, money starts to become positioning. And positioning creates power. A woman named Rachel learns this in a way that looks unimpressive on paper. She does not sell a company. She does not become a millionaire overnight. She simply spends years lowering the fragility of her life. She kills the consumer debt, builds cash reserves, avoids lifestyle inflation when her income rises, keeps her fixed costs sane, invests steadily, says no to the pressure to upgrade everything the minute she can technically afford it. Her friends think she's overly cautious. Then the company restructures. Half the office goes into silent cardiac arrest. People suddenly become very agreeable, very available, very willing to tolerate things that would have offended them last month. They need the paycheck. They need continuity. They need the machine to keep blessing them. Rachel feels the stress too. But she does not collapse into submission. Because she has space. Space is the first luxury wealth buys. Not luxury in the consumer sense. Luxury in the human sense. The ability to think clearly when other people are cornered. That's milestone 1. And here's the reframe most people need. If you haven't reached this point yet, you are not behind because you lack status. You are behind because you still lack defensive distance. The poor are exposed. The middle class often looks protected but is still exposed. The rich begin by becoming hard to coerce. That's the first separation. The second milestone is where the game becomes almost invisible to outsiders, because this is where money stops merely protecting you from bad outcomes and starts systematically producing better ones. This is the point where capital becomes more important than effort. And people hate hearing that. They want to believe hard work remains the central force forever because that belief feels fair. It feels motivating. It feels democratic. Put in the hours. Build the skills. Stay disciplined. Earn your way up. But effort has a ceiling. Capital changes ceilings. The second milestone is when the returns on what you own begin to matter more than the hours you personally produce. That's when the rich stop operating like upgraded workers and start operating like owners. This does not always look dramatic at first. In fact, it often looks boring. A portfolio large enough that market growth in a good year exceeds what many people earn with full-time labor. Rental properties throwing off real cash flow after expenses. Equity in a business that grows while the owner sleeps. Ownership stakes, dividend streams, private deals, appreciating assets, tax-efficient structures. The details vary. The pattern does not. Once someone reaches the point where their capital is producing serious, recurring economic force, their relationship to time changes completely. Most people sell tomorrow to pay for today. The rich increasingly let yesterday pay for tomorrow. That is a different civilization. And if you've never seen it clearly, you may still be trapped in one of the most common financial delusions in modern life, believing income is the main thing. Income matters. Of course it matters. But high income without scalable ownership can become a treadmill with luxury upholstery. You run faster, you earn more, the life gets shinier, the taxes get uglier, and the dependence remains. Meanwhile, someone with lower visible income but meaningful ownership begins widening the gap in quieter ways. Imagine 2 men in their 40s. One is a surgeon earning an enormous salary. The other owns pieces of 3 small businesses, a growing brokerage account, and a warehouse property with long-term tenants. At dinner, the surgeon looks richer. Bigger house. Newer car. More prestige. More obvious proof. But watch the next 10 years carefully. The surgeon must keep performing at a very high level to keep the engine alive. If burnout hits, if health changes, if reimbursement changes, if he wants out, the stream narrows fast. His income is impressive, but it is still attached to him. The other man's life may look less glamorous. But more of his income arrives whether or not he had a difficult Tuesday. He is building a machine that does not fully depend on his daily emotional weather. That machine is wealth. This is where the middle class often gets ambushed by a dangerous half-truth. They are told to focus on earning more, and that advice works up to a point. A higher income can absolutely accelerate your progress. But if most of that higher income gets converted into higher lifestyle instead of higher ownership, then your success becomes decorative. You feel elevated, but structurally, you're still labor. And labor, no matter how elite, is vulnerable. The rich understand something most people resist for too long. Work can make you comfortable, but ownership changes your species. That sentence makes people uncomfortable because it sounds harsh. It's still true. Once capital starts doing the heavy lifting, you stop experiencing every dollar as something that must be personally hunted down. Time opens. Optionality expands. Market downturns become opportunities rather than merely threats. Conversations change. You stop asking, how can I make more money this month? And start asking, where should capital sit for the next decade? That is not just a richer person. That is a different operating system. And then we reach the third milestone, which is where the real separation becomes almost impossible to close, because by this point wealth is no longer functioning mainly as income or even as freedom. It becomes architecture. This is the milestone where the wealthy stop thinking in individual pay cycles, even individual lifetimes, and start thinking in systems that outlast them. Most people, Even successful people still think of money as something they earn, save, spend, and maybe pass down if there's enough left over. The truly wealthy think of it differently. They think in structures, entities, trusts, holdings, tax layers, liquidity events, asset protection, intergenerational transfers, geographic flexibility, strategic philanthropy, controlled ownership, voting rights, timing, legacy without chaos. To the average ear, this sounds abstract, maybe even cold. It isn't cold. It's simply what money becomes when it is no longer fighting fires. This third milestone is when wealth stops being a pile and starts becoming a system designed to preserve, direct, and reproduce advantage. That's when you stop merely having money and start shaping the environment around your money. And this is where the myth of meritocracy gets especially shaky, because once a family reaches this level, their children are not starting from the same place as everyone else. Not even close. They inherit more than assets. They inherit error tolerance. They inherit access. They inherit time. They inherit networks that don't feel like networks because they're simply called people we know. They inherit the ability to take risks with a soft landing below them. They inherit exposure to how money behaves when it is organized, not improvised. That matters more than most people want to admit. A mediocre decision made on top of strong structures can still produce a decent result. A smart decision made in a fragile life can still get crushed by one bad year. That is why the rich often seem calmer than everyone else. Not because they are more virtuous. Not because they are emotionally superior. Because their systems absorb shocks that would personally wound other people. Think about two families facing the same problem. A child wants to start a business that might fail. In one family, failure means debt, shame, a lost decade, and emergency recovery. In the other, failure becomes feedback. Same ambition, different consequences. This is why telling ordinary people to take more risks can be stupid advice. Risk is not just about personality. Risk is about what happens if you lose. The wealthy can often act bolder because their downside has been professionally softened. That is milestone 3, when wealth is organized so well that it starts protecting itself, multiplying itself, and repositioning future generations before those generations have done anything at all. Now step back and notice what these 3 milestones really are. The first is independence from immediate pressure. The second is independence from pure labor. The third is independence from one lifetime. That is the latter. And most people never climb it because they are taught to obsess over symbols instead of structure. They chase visible success before invisible resilience. They chase income before control. They chase luxury before ownership. They chase scale before defense. They chase applause before architecture. And because of that, they can spend 20 years looking richer while remaining economically fragile in all the ways that actually matter. This is why someone can earn more than their parents ever dreamed and still not be meaningfully wealthy. Because if your lifestyle is expensive, your time is fully monetized, your assets are shallow, and your future depends on continued high performance, then what you have built may be admirable, but it is not the same thing as wealth. It is advanced participation in the game. The rich are increasingly standing outside parts of the game. That's the difference. And here is the hardest part to accept. Each milestone requires becoming the kind of person who can delay a certain kind of gratification. To reach the first milestone, you have to resist the cultural script that says every raise should become evidence. Bigger apartment, better car, more visible proof that things are working. You have to prefer margin over image. To reach the second, you have to stop worshiping earned income so much that you neglect ownership. You have to accept that looking productive and becoming powerful are not always the same thing. To reach the third, you have to think beyond your own ego. Beyond my salary, my house, my retirement, my success story. You have to think like a builder of systems, not just a beneficiary of cash flow. Most people never make that psychological transition. They want the rewards of wealth with the emotional habits of consumption. They want to feel rich sooner than they want to become structurally difficult to destroy. And that impatience is expensive, because wealth is not mostly the story of money coming in. It is the story of dependence leaving. Dependence on bosses. Dependence on one stream. Dependence on timing. Dependence on your body always holding up. Dependence on luck not turning on you at the wrong moment. Every milestone removes a deeper layer of dependence. That is what the rich are actually buying. Not just stuff. Distance from coercion. Distance from fragility. Distance from volatility. Distance from having to turn every problem into a personal emergency. Once you see that, a lot of modern financial advice starts sounding shallow. Just earn more. Just save 10%. Just invest in index funds and wait. Those ideas are not useless. They are just incomplete. They describe ingredients, not milestones. Motion, not transformation. The real question is not whether you're doing some good financial habits. The real question is, what kind of life structure are those habits creating? Are they creating breathing room? Are they creating ownership? Are they creating systems? Or are they just funding a more expensive version of dependence? Because that is the nightmare disguised as progress. A person can upgrade everything except their actual power. And one final truth makes this even sharper. These milestones are not only economic. They are emotional filters. At milestone 1, you stop making so many decisions from fear. At milestone 2, you stop tying your worth entirely to output. At milestone 3, you stop thinking of money as proof and start treating it as infrastructure. That emotional evolution matters because people who never make it keep misreading what the rich are doing. They see confidence and think arrogance. They see patience and think passivity. They see selectiveness and think luck. What they're often seeing is reduced desperation. And reduced desperation is one of the most profitable states a human being can enter. You negotiate better. You invest better. You choose better. You wait better. You recover better. You stop reaching for every shining thing because you no longer need every opportunity to save you. That's the real divide. Not private jets. Not watches. Not zip codes. The divide is between people whose money serves as insulation, engine, and structure, and people whose money is still mostly a temporary receipt for effort. So if you want the truth behind wealth, stop asking, how much do rich people make? That's a beginner's question. Ask instead, how much of their life is protected from urgency? How much of their income arrives without their direct labor? How much of their advantage is already embedded in systems that will keep paying, protecting, and compounding long after a single good year? That is where the separation lives. Quietly, brutally, and in plain sight. The rich are not simply people with more money. They are people who crossed milestones that changed what money means. And if you never learn to see those milestones clearly, you can spend your whole life admiring wealth from the outside while accidentally building something else entirely. Something shinier. Something louder. Something more socially convincing. But not the same thing. Not even close.